and welcome to this edition of the Native News Update on this Friday, November 26th. I'm your host for today's program, Paul DeMain. And today we're going to go to Alaska shortly for an update from Alaska Public Radio Network News Director Lori Townsend. But first, we want to make sure that you've had your fill of turkey. You should be on your second shift, which means that you should have gotten your full dose of that tryptophan, which some people claims makes you sleepy. However, according to the scientific review that I've just looked at, that's just a bogus claim. But that tryptophan actually is made for serotonin, which then calms you down. So whether you're asleep or calmed down, we're hoping that you had a good turkey. Let's go to Alaska and find out what's going up there with Lori Townsend. Welcome to the Native News Update, Lori.
Hi, Paul. Nice to be with you.
You're going to give us a little bit of an update on some of the things that are happening way up and over there in Alaska and the Native communities. So the first thing that's on the top of my head is the finalization, hopefully, of the Alaskan Senate race, which Murkowski won as a write-in candidate, one of the first times in 40 or 50 years that something like that is happening. And the Tea Party Republican candidate Joe Miller is trying to say that if Lisa is spelled with an E rather than an I, that ballot should be thrown out. Does he have a chance of prevailing on this appeal of the vote as it finally was tallied and certified and announced and all that stuff?
Well, it hasn't been certified yet. The part of the court action that Joe Miller is undertaking is to prevent the state from certifying the election until these legal issues that he has raised have been answered. He took his case to federal court first, and Judge Weislein, the federal district court judge, did something unusual in that he told Miller that the case should be filed in state court, not federal court, but he did leave room for his intervention. He did agree to temporarily halt the certification of the race if Miller filed his complaint in state court by last Monday, which he did do. And so now it's a state court proceeding. Miller is asking for the judges to consider that voter intent has to mesh on these write-in ballots with what he says is the letter of the law, saying that the write-in name must appear as it is on the candidate's declaration of intent to run. So they put a name down there, and you can put whatever you want down. You could put Felix the cat down on your intent to run if that's what you wanted to be listed as, and people would have to put that down. The gray area comes into, would it be all right if you said just Felix or F cat? Would that work?
In other words, Murkowski could have said Lisa M, Lisam, and that would have been okay. They tried to convince people that they needed to write the entire name, and I know that they were telling people to write it on their hand and things like that, all kinds of little things. But that the Miller campaign even tried to confuse it by having all kinds of people sign up as write-in candidates.
Well, the Miller campaign says that wasn't their call. They didn't come out and denounce it, but there were other people that were his supporters that said, hey, go sign up, and about 160 people did, as unconscionable as that seems. They did do that to confuse the issue. And now the battle comes down to what the lieutenant governor says is an effort to not disenfranchise voters who wanted to vote for Lisa Murkowski and wrote down a variation of her name. And the Division of Elections official, the head of the Division of Elections, Gail Fanumii, said that she was looking at them, and if she could pronounce the name and understood that this was the intention of the voter to write Lisa Murkowski in, that she was counting those. Now, there were 8,000 of those ballots with either slight misspellings that Fanumii said were fine, that the Miller campaign challenged, and those have been kind of sequestered away. They were counted for Murkowski, but they're being challenged. if Joe Miller prevails on having those challenge ballots thrown out, Lisa Murkowski still leads by about 2,200 votes, I think it is.
Right.
Now his other contention is that she benefited from having a hand count of her ballots, and his ballots were counted by machines, which he says sometimes kick ballots out, that maybe he would have had more votes had he also had a hand count. So he wants all the ballots hand counted. I don't know if he'll prevail on that. I'm not sure what kind of a legal precedent he could show that could compel the state to do that. And I don't know if he has enough money to pay for a hand recount by himself, because that might be what the state will say. Well, if you want a hand count and they agree to it, you'll have to pay for it. He didn't complain about the voting machines and their accuracy in the primary when he won, so I don't know what kind of a standing he'll have, and now arguing that process might not be fair. So those are the two issues that he's challenging. The Lieutenant Governor, Craig Campbell, has said that he wants to make sure voters aren't disenfranchised. That's why, and there is legal precedent for allowing slight misspellings and still letting people have their vote counted. And also he raised the point that a lot of people in rural Alaska, bush Alaska, English isn't their first language. So minor misspellings, or people who are dyslexic, even in the cities, people that have struggles with trying to spell, but he wants to make sure that their votes are still counted. So these are the things that are being challenged.
But the federal judge basically said, look, the state can protect the voters, and the state has basically said, look, when someone's writing Lisa Murkowski's name out and there's one letter out of place, the intent is to cast a ballot for her. Everyone else seems to be a sore loser. In other words, man, you can cry around about the whole process. When it works for you, it's great, and when it don't work for you, it's just a fact. So, all right.
Well, I thought it was interesting that Norm Coleman, who was beat in Minnesota, of course, by Al Franken, has come out now and said, "Give it up, Joe. The race is over. It's time to let this go." So,
well,
he's not going to do that, though.
There are some sensible Republicans out there, after all. Okay.
We'll see what happens.
Okay, you got polar bears in Alaska, and there's some rulings up there that seem out of the box a little bit. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, in 2008, polar bears were listed by the Interior Department as threatened under the Endangered Species Act, much to the chagrin of environmental groups who wanted to see them listed as endangered. They listed them as threatened, with the potential of becoming endangered, and they put in place a caveat that said, an exemption that said that greenhouse gas emissions can't be factored into putting in place protections for the polar bears so that it would not impact industry and other things. And that's why environmental groups were upset, saying, well, then there's no teeth here. This doesn't help. Sea ice is melting. It's due to climate change. Climate change is impacted by fossil fuel emissions. If you're not going to regulate these things to help polar bear sea ice loss be stopped, then we're not going to be able to prevail in saving polar bears. One thing that the Interior Department did not do in 2008 was establish critical habitat for the bears. The Center for Biological Diversity sued to force that to happen, and that finally was announced on Wednesday. The critical habitat is 187,000 miles along the northern coast of Alaska and up into Canada, area bordering Canada, the Arctic, a large swath of the Chukchi and Beaufort Seas, and part of the terrestrial area on a strip of coastal land in Alaska where a lot of the denning takes place. So here's this big swath of territory, ocean and ground territory, that's designated as critical habitat now. And what that means is you can't do any sort of activity in that area without going through this list of things that are within the Endangered Species Act to make sure that you're not impacting their habitat. The North Slope Burough Mayor, Mayor Itta, the Inupiaq people of the North Slope, who are longtime whalers, has come out disappointed with the critical habitat designation for a few reasons. Part of it is he says he's afraid people will think, well, okay, we can be relaxed now. The polar bears are protected. They've got their critical habitat. Everything will be fine. And of course, that's not the case. And he also is concerned about how this listing will impact routine oil and gas development on the North Slope, which those communities rely on for the tax base that they're getting. And also, he's concerned about how it may impact any sort of development. Barrow and
logging and mining and stuff like that, or
well, there's no logging going on up there, but
okay. Yeah,
there
you're
is.
in a tundra area, right? Is that what it is, or what? Okay,
Yeah,
I'm sorry,
yeah.
but any kind of development. I mean, what would we be talking about? What are they looking at? They're not.
He is concerned about just routine oil and gas work that's going on land there being impacted, having more regulatory burden. But he's also concerned about things like Kaktovik on Barter Island, which is way up there on the North Slope, being impacted. They need a new runway, and he's afraid that even though Kaktovik and Barrow have been exempted, as have 5 radar facilities of the Air Force, been exempted from the critical habitat rules. And the only reason they have these exemptions is because all these communities have hazing programs in place where they're trying to drive polar bears away from facilities and places where humans are, so they don't end up having to kill them because they won't stay away from humans. So they have these programs in place which you're not allowed to do if bears or animals are protected. You can't bother them. You can't harass them. And so they had to give these exemptions. So he's concerned that even though they have an exemption, that exemption might not apply to Kaktovik needing a new runway for its airstrip, and that will be halted.
Okay, we got about a minute left in this program today. Besides my suggestion of getting a polar bear crossing guard on the airport runway, what's this thing with Shell Company? They're involved in that somewhere a little bit?
Well, Shell Alaska has has purchased some offshore leases that they'd like to start developing about 15 miles offshore in the Beaufort Sea. They also have Chukchi Sea leases. And they have entered into an agreement. It's kind of a historic agreement. I don't know that it's been done anywhere else in the past, where the North Slope Burough has signed a 5-year collaborative science study agreement with Shell. Shell will pay for it. The North Slope Burough gets to help form the steering committee. It will have an appointee from each of the 6 communities there in the North Slope. It will have scientists that are a panel of scientists that Shell identifies who are independent, and the North Slope Burough will help form them.
Okay. Tell us where we can find these stories.
You can find these stories and more at APRN.org.
Always good talking to you. We're going to come back to you in another week or two and do another catch up with news and information. You got any light left up there?
It's beautiful today. We had a rainstorm, then a snowstorm, and now it's just gorgeous. Sunshine and lovely. But it'll be gone in about an hour.
Talk to you again, Lori.
Bye, Paul.
And that is the latest roundup of news from Indian Country on this edition of the Native News Update. Come back again soon.